Hello there folks. Shoplifting is on the rise. This is entirely as to be expected as the cost of living crisis continues to bite. As more people are driven into poverty, they will take more drastic action in order to make ends meet for themselves and their families. In the last 12 months to March, 340,000 cases of shoplifting were reported to police forces across the country, with around 14% resulting in charges being pressed. The solutions to getting shoplifting numbers down are obvious. Grow the economy, get inflation down, and increase wages and benefits. This is not rocket science. Jacob Rees-Mogg should be thoroughly ashamed. He is a member of a political party which has imposed such a devastating lowering of our living standards. But of course, he is not even remotely ashamed. As you will witness from the following debate, he refuses to even acknowledge the reasons more and more people are resorting to petty crimes like shoplifting, perhaps because to acknowledge reality would be to admit he is somewhat responsible for the mess in which this country finds itself. Ultimately, he takes the attitude a shoplifter is like any other thief and should be punished accordingly. This is a man so far removed from the struggles experienced in day-to-day life by the average impoverished person, it further cements the belief he should be absolutely nowhere near the levers of power. Amy Nickell-Turner admirably brings some common sense into the debate, and former Tory MP and barrister Jerry Hayes also wades in. Let's take a look.
Is Britain broken? Well, ministers seem to think so. As it does emerge, plans are being drawn up to help the justice system crack down on repeat offenders, specifically on crimes such as shoplifting, burglary and violence. The individuals in question will soon receive mandatory prison sentences, while repeat offences don't necessitate prison sentences. The new legislation seeks to resolve this through the Crime and Justice Bill. And this comes as figures reveal the police recorded nearly 400,000 cases of shoplifting, and yet only 48,000, about 14%, resulted in charges. Indeed, the British Retail Consortium predicts the actual number is close at 8 million, costing roughly 1 billion to British businesses, but that gets passed on to us as consumers. Another component of ministers' plans is to extend the use of facial recognition technology. As it currently stands, only the Metropolitan South Wales Police use it. But ministers think this could streamline the justice process, especially as a wanted sex offender was found by a camera at the coronation earlier this year. He wasn't actually at the coronation. He was in the crowd, just to reassure you. Anyway, my panel's still with me, and the San Francisco reference was that in San Francisco you can shoplift up to $900 or something.
You don't shoplift, Jacob.
And then
you're a thief.
Oh, very good.
You're a thief.
Okay.
You're not a shoplifter, and you're not a joyrider. You're a thief of a car.
Okay, so you're in favour of these tougher sentences?
No, of course I'm not, because it's absolutely ridiculous. There's some spotty child of 25 at number 10 Downing Street who's saying, oh, Secretary of State, what a brilliant idea we've had. Look, you've got mandatory sentences for 3 burglars, 3 strikes, and all
they
the
don't
rest.
actually happen, do they?
Yes, they do. Of course they do. What you've got to do is
we
get
had a policeman on last week who said they never seem to happen.
Well, they're talking absolute nonsense. Of course they happen.
He was
the
a
policeman. Well, the policeman should have. You should have asked the policeman. I'm sure you did. Well, why didn't you turn up? The biggest problem is for burglaries. The police do not turn up.
But why don't the police turn up? Because since 2010, there's been a 33% reduction in the number of police. So there's not as many police to attend to.
It's gone back up again.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
It's gone back up, yes.
Back up.
However, they're not trained in the same way they were. So they're not a specialist. So you couldn't have somebody going to certain situations or doing fast pursuit driving, for example, because they're not trained in it yet. The police force isn't as well functioning.
No, but catching shoplifters,
but hang on a minute. Let's go back to shoplifting. Let's go back to shoplifting.
Handcuffs.
The reason it's not practical is because there's currently a court backlog of 60,000 cases. The police, as we've mentioned, are completely overstretched, and the prisons are stuffed. So they're already 10,000 over capacity. So you need to get rid of 10,000 before you can even put another one in.
We're on the same page on this, but you're nearly right. Crown Court, and we don't deal with shoplifters, but we will.
Thieves,
if
you
there's
called
gonna
them
be-
a moment ago
thieves,
now.
Yes, I know.
Do you know what you should actually call them?
Don't
you
do
should,
the
you should probably
barrister
call
on
them
me, Jacob.
people in poverty or those addicted to drugs, because that's the overwhelming
Whoa.
people who commit these petty shoplifting
not
crimes. So I don't actually consider them
necessarily.
criminals, even really.
How do you
in
mean
most
they're
cases.
not criminals?
Because most people are fueling an
So
addiction.
you'd like us to be San
or-
Francisco, which has completely gone to pot.
Yeah, I think I am a bit more
if
San
someone
Francisco on this one,
burgles
I have
your
to say.
house,
We're not
or
talking about
steal-
that, Jerry. We're talking about shoplifting.
Okay, if someone steals from your local your local store
Go
run
on.
by a family, they
why
are
do we
not
do this?
thieves, they are not criminals. Is
Let's
that what
go
you're saying?
stealing baby powder from Tesco's.
But they're
Does that
still
person
stealing.
deserve to be in prison?
Well,
I don't think they deserve to be in prison.
there's
They weren't
actually-
sent to
there's
prison.
rarely
on.
an episode of shoplifting
No.
which would deserve a place in a
You
prison.
pick on baby powder, but baby powder, I read in the paper in the last few days, is being mixed in with drugs to bulk it up. So it depends why people are stealing baby powder. If they're stealing it because they're part of the drugs trade, of course you want them to go to prison.
I think
Please forgive me because I've led a relatively sheltered life, but it doesn't really make much sense. If you're a drug gang and you're wanting to bulk up your product, surely you wouldn't want to arouse suspicion by stealing baby powder. Surely you'd just purchase it in a normal transaction with a normal shop. Correct me if I'm wrong. Feel free.
that's quite an outrageous suggestion when
Well,
there's
it was in the
plenty of
paper
evidence,
in this
also
week
plenty of
about
evidence
people
of
using baby
what's
powder
the
to
biggest
bulk up
driver of
drugs.
shoplifting? It's poverty.
No,
it's drug
it's
addiction.
not
There's a
actually.
Well, what
functioning
else
welfare
is it?
system in
It's
this
not
country that means
actually.
nobody has to
It's
steal to
not.
get basic
Functioning
foodstuffs.
welfare system.
God, it's just sickening, isn't it? A sitting Tory MP and a former Tory MP totally unwilling to accept the realities of poverty. Thank God for food banks. If they think shoplifting's bad now, imagine if there were no food banks. Good Lord. It's in their DNA to be this ignorant about the poor.
System is shrinking, and unfortunately people have been drawn into
This
poverty.
isn't true.
For example,
benefits are uprated in line with inflation in March.
absolutely not. There's been
April.
caps. The two-child policy has put 250,000 additional children into poverty.
So you live, I know where you live, but I won't mention it on air.
How do you know where I live?
Because I spoke to your husband.
Oh.
Yeah. And he told me how you imagine you live together. But I mean, all right, you live in a nice part of the country. And I bet you've got a corner shop run by a lovely family whose margins are pretty difficult. Are you saying that someone who comes in and steals something from them is not a criminal?
What I'm saying is it shouldn't come to that. We should have
No.
prevention
No.
so that no one is
But if it
driven to
does come to
shoplifting.
that-
Yeah.
Well, if it was a repeat offender and there was violence involved, of course, fast track that
That's a
through the
different
court
matter. That's a
system.
robbery.
But if it is a petty
That's a
shoplifting,
robbery.
But if they
that
steal-
is such a waste of government
But
money
even if
to
they steal
end that
from
in prison.
Tesco's, prices for everybody else, including people who aren't well off, who shop in Tesco's, go up to compensate for it. There's no free theft.
Let's not pretend supermarkets aren't ripping us off anyway. Food inflation is still at around 13.5%. How can that be? They are ripping us off. And it's not because of shoplifting. They're ripping us off because they're jacking up prices to take advantage of the public when they're at their lowest, kicking us while we're down. So we need not worry about them jacking up prices because of shoplifters. They're jacking up prices anyway.
But the thing is, the way the cost of living crisis has disproportionately affected people in poverty. So say if the price of pasta has gone up by 120%, which
So
I
you
think
can
it has
steal
in
it.
some
You can
cases,
steal it then.
that will affect people on lower incomes a lot more than
So
those
you
on
can
higher
go and
incomes.
steal it then. It's okay.
Unfortunately, the way the world is at the moment, more people are in poverty and more people are forced to shoplift.
Let's get on to face recognition.
It just doesn't really get more Tory than this, does it? They have created this problem through gross mismanagement of the economy. And on top of making everybody poorer, apart from themselves, of course, they now want to start jailing people for stealing from supermarkets. The very same supermarkets that are ripping us all off. There are very few people who want to steal. The majority aren't doing it for a laugh. So this rush to brand people thieves is just... Ugh. Of course, burglary's different. Entirely different. And of course burglars should be jailed. But for poor people stealing food during this time, to impose mandatory jail time on them without listening to the context behind why they are shoplifting and why they are resorting to such drastic measures. I'm sorry, but this is just a further decline in our already crap country. Fix the problems you have created, and this problem will largely go away. But they won't, because they're absolutely bloody useless. Anyway, I'll just end it there because their repulsive ignorance speaks for itself. So yeah. Cheers for watching, and I'll catch you again soon.